This is Nick Black, and today I'm in Beverly Hills. I'm in Candy Clark's car because the restaurant was too noisy. Firstly, Candy, thanks very much for taking time to talk with us.
You're welcome, Nick. Glad to be here, I think.
Okay, Candy, let's start, shall we? When did you become first interested in acting?
Well, when I lived in New York, I guess it was in the late 60s, early 70s, I was a model. And from the modeling, it kind of seemed like a natural progression to get into the acting end. First was an extra in a film called Who is Harry Kellerman? And Why is he saying those things about me? And once I did that, I decided, this is kind of the life for me. I wouldn't mind doing more of this extra work. And from there, I met a casting director and gave him his name was Lynn Stallmaster, New York casting director, gave him my picture and said, I'd like to do more extra work, but I guess he thought that maybe I don't know what he thought. Maybe he thought I had the right look for a part, but he recommended me to another casting agent, and they were looking to cast this John Huston film called Fat City. And lo and behold, I immediately kind of got in way over my head, and I was trying out for actual acting roles with speaking. And it wasn't really something I wanted to do, but I was kind of forced into it. And then once I did it and did an audition and everything and actually got the part in Fat City, I'll never know how that happened, but I kind of got the bug and I wanted to do some more acting, and from there I went on to American Graffiti.
Did that mean that you left the modeling behind, basically?
That's what it means.
Okay, well, I mean, you're in a film that's very, very well respected these days called Fat City, directed by one of the Hollywood legends, John Huston. How was it? You didn't have any acting background? You were thrown in the deep end. Did Mr. Huston help you out there, or...?
Well, actually, I wasn't much of a film buff. And when I met John Huston, I really didn't know who he was. And I met Ray Stark and John Huston, two Hollywood legends, but dumb me from Fort Worth, Texas, really didn't know who I was talking to. And so I guess I really wasn't that intimidated because I just thought they were, some nice people.
So, Candy, how was it on a real Hollywood film set for the first time, not being an extra, being one of the lead actresses?
Well, I would recommend it to anyone. It was a lot of fun.
Candy, let's talk about a very well-known film, American Graffiti. Tell me how you got the part.
I got American Graffiti by auditioning, and there was a whole bunch of people auditioning for my same part, and I thought I'd never get it in a million years. Haskell Wexler owned a commercial shooting studio, and that's where the screen tests were being done. And I first met George Lucas, and at that point of my career, I was kind of desperate to get work because it had been a year since Fat City, which was the first film I did with John Huston. So I was desperate to get a job, and I was never really good at cold readings or auditions. So when I went in to meet George Lucas, I was under the impression that American Graffiti took place in the 1950s. That's what I had been told, and nobody had really read a script. And so I went in and I thought, this time I'm dressing for the part. Maybe they'll just see me as the part, see me as the character, and I'll just get the job. So I went in, I had a Letterman sweater on, which is like a football sweater with an initial of a school. I had a ring around my neck on a chain. I had blue jeans rolled up. I had saddle of Oxfords on with bobby socks, and I had my hair pulled back in a ponytail. And out in the lobby, I noticed that I was the only one dressed in this fashion. Everyone else was dressed in street clothes. And so I went in to meet George Lucas. George is kind of a quiet person anyway, but at that moment he was really quiet and was looking at me like I had two heads because I was, obviously desperate for a job and then from the wrong era. So the meeting didn't go well. And it was pretty silent, and I was kind of doing all the talking, and then it was over with, and I left. But in the meantime, a couple of weeks passed, and I hadn't heard anything back, so I knew I had really blown it. But I had managed to get a script and read it, and then I realized my mistake, that the whole film took place in the 60s, which was totally different from the 50s. And so I begged my manager, please, could you get me back in? And she said, impossible. Once they see you, once they don't want to, they're not interested, they don't want to see you again, they don't have time to repeat and view everybody over and over again. So I just said, please just try to do something. And so somehow they got me back in. Yes, they got me back in. This time I dressed as myself, and I didn't mention the fact that I had been there before to George. And
did he remember you?
He didn't say anything about me coming in before, so I guess not. And maybe they were just all pretending that it was my first time, and I certainly was. Next thing I knew, I was being asked to do a screen test. And at the screen test, there were just hundreds of people there, for my part and everybody else's part. And I remember doing the screen test with Charlie. He had the job, and I didn't. And Charlie played the Toad, Charles Martin Smith, and he had the job and I didn't. And they had a little park bench there, and that was supposed to be the car. And I remember thinking, gosh, he's so short and I'm so tall that they're never going to pick me because they always like the women shorter than the men, if it's a romantic kind of thing. But I guess they kind of like the Mutt and Jeff look, the tall and the short. And lo and behold, I got the part. And then the next thing I knew, Charlie and I were driving up to San Francisco in my Volkswagen Beetle, which broke down in Santa Barbara. And that was on a Sunday, and we had to get the car repaired. We had to find someone that had a car repair place in their house. We were looking in the Yellow Pages, and we found someone that had a repair shop in their home, in their garage, and we got the Beetle fixed, and we arrived in the San Francisco Bay Area about midnight, and I probably had to go into a wardrobe fitting because they were desperate because we were shooting the next day. And I just kind of picked the first dress that passed me, and that little striped blue dress.
Your perseverance paid off because American Graffiti has been nominated one of the greatest American films of all time, one of the 100 greatest American films of all time, as deemed by the American Film Institute.
And it's really an honor because in any given 6 months they'll do 100 films. So this film was from 1970, came out in 1973, we shot it in 1972, so thousands and thousands upon thousands of films have been released. And so to get in the top 100 isn't easy.
Yeah.
So I was very pleased and honored. And as time goes by, American Graffiti seems to gather a bigger and bigger following. And we did a big thing for the Academy where they had the screening of the film on the 25th anniversary. And it was sold out. And they said they could have sold that theater out over and over and over again. And it was a big question and answer thing. And even George Lucas showed up. The writers, Gloria and Willard Hayek, showed up and they videotaped it. I have a copy of that. And then this year, they're bringing the graffiti people to the Aspen Comedy Film Festival, shipping us all in, and we're going to do another question and answer thing. And they shot us for all photograph for Vanity Fair at the first of the year, and we had a 3-page sold out in the Vanity Fair magazine, which came out in April, the Hollywood issue. And it just seems like there's just more, as time goes by, we are getting more and more publicity and more interest, and thing is building and building and building. And it just seems like, it's becoming a classic like The Wizard of Oz, and the Yellow Hot Rod is like the Ruby Slippers, and it's just, it's just building. And it's 27 years old, the film.
A timeless classic. Well, for a young and upcoming actress, that was a great part. Candy, that would have been important in the development of your career?
It was a very good luck film for everybody that was in it. Everybody went on to have a bigger career, and even people with just small parts, tiny little parts, went on to develop bigger careers like Suzanne Summers and Kathleen Quinlan. And it was just good luck for everyone. George Lucas went on to do Star Wars, and it gave him a break because before Graffiti he was pretty well unknown, and Graffiti would have not been shot if it hadn't been for Francis Coppola vouching for American Graffiti and putting his name on as a producer, because at that time Francis was a huge star and what he said kind of went, and he said American Graffiti was a good enough film, then Universal listened. But without Francis, I don't think it would have even shot anything. And I remember there were a lot of controversy about the title American Graffiti. Universal was saying nobody's going to know what graffiti means. And so they were tossing around ideas like Rock Around the Block and terrible names like that. And I was like, oh, please don't let them choose that. I think American Graffiti has a nice flow to it. I put in my 2 cents. Fortunately, the name stuck. And, of course, now everyone knows what graffiti is because it's everywhere. And it has a good flow. American Graffiti. It just goes together.
And it's 2 words. I quickly want to talk about one of the strangest films ever made, The Man Who Fell to Earth. Now, can you tell us a little bit about that film, Candy?
In my mind, it's not a strange film at all. It makes perfect sense. But I don't know which version you saw, but the version that was meant to be seen was Nick Rogue's version, which is 2 hours and 23 minutes. What the U.S. population saw was the cut version, and it was 2 hours. The 2-hour version makes absolutely no sense and could be called strange. The version cut by Nick Rogue is, to me, an excellent film, easily followed, and very ahead of its time, and gorgeously photographed, and it's got David Bowie in it, and he was perfect as the Man from Another Planet. I couldn't think of better casting. And he and I had a blast working on it, and it had other great actors in it, Rip Torn, Buck Henry. And, I don't know why you think it's strange, but to me it's an excellent film.
Let's say unusual entertainment.
It may be unusual. It was Nick Rogue. He was playing around with film and playing around with time and going back and forth, and he was experimenting. Maybe you ought to look at it again. Maybe you will have caught up with it.
I will do so. Running out of time, I also want to mention that you've been in some fabulous films over the years.
So I just did a film, most recently with one of your Australian boys, Jeffrey Wright. We did a film called Cherry Falls, and I guess it'll be out in Australia at some point pretty soon. And then most recently, last week, I just finished up a film called The Month of August, a little independent film that'll probably be in film festivals. And so I've been busy. I've moved back to California. I was living in New Jersey, and now I've moved back to California, and things are pretty sunny here.
Excellent. Because we've run out of time, I just want to quickly jump through your resume very quickly. You've got a fantastic actor's resume there, Candy. A film that I particularly like, because When You're Coming Back, Red Rider. The sequel, More American Graffiti, which I really enjoyed. A very well-respected film called Q, the Winged Serpent, directed by Larry Cohen, No Close Range, etc., etc. But Candy, I want to thank you very much for taking time to talk with us. Thank you very much, Candy Clark.
Thank you.